Hey everybody, it's your man Manny Faces here with Newsbeat once again coming to you in a video and audio format. We're putting this on YouTube, so if you're listening to the audio on the feed, are we putting it on the feed?
Putting it on the feed. It's going on the feed.
Well, you're gonna hear it, but you want to see
That's
it.
where everybody's at, aren't they?
Listen, go to YouTube, check us out over there. If you're on YouTube, hello. Thanks for coming by. I'm joined as before. We just did a quick episode that dropped earlier this week about the genocide case against Israel brought by South Africa to the International Court, which we'll explain, or you might have heard the episode. I'm joined once again by Rashed Mian, our managing editor, and Cool Cat, and Christopher Tawarski, our editor-in-chief and very cool cat. What's up, gentlemen?
What's going on? According to the screen, he's just Chris, so I don't know,
Well,
I like to change it up. I
apologize for doxing you. Your name's on the website, so either way. Speaking of which, we are at usnewsbeat.com. From there, you can check out all of our past episodes, information about us, and other tidbits. But you can also go to our Substack, which is a free Substack. It's at newsbeat.substack.com. And there you can find the episode drops, and with each episode, added bonus information as well as bonus drops, like this one. This one's not really a planned episode in that we thought about it yesterday and we're doing it today. So we wanted to get into a little bit of a update as we talked about the genocide case against Israel with our previous guest, Professor Boyle. Who broke down what was going to happen, and now it's happening. We're kind of right in the middle of it, so we wanted to come back and update folks, who wanted to get a little bit more insight as to what's exactly happening and how it's going down. So, Chris, give us why don't you start us off, sir?
Yeah. So, Manny, as you said, we're trying to stay on this subject, on this topic. We consider it one of the most important events, atrocities that are taking place right now in the world. And back in November, we dropped an episode titled 9/11 Redux. Will the Israeli-Hamas conflict lead to a renewed war on terror? And here we are several months in, approaching 30,000 dead civilians in Gaza, over 60,000 injured. And it looks like the conflict is spreading. Just last night, the U.S. and U.K. bombed Yemen. The Houthis there had been, I guess, attacking, naval vessels passing through there. And, we started the first episode as a warning. We compared the rhetoric after 9/11 to the rhetoric we were hearing in the wake of the atrocities of October 7th against Israel. And here we are again. We just felt we needed to get back on the air and shine a little bit more light on this historic hearing that just took place the past 2 days. South Africa made a case, filed a case before the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide. And Manny, as you mentioned, we had an incredible guest on last week, international human rights attorney, professor of law, Francis Boyle, who believes that South Africa will be successful in getting this order, which could have huge ramifications for the conflict. He, just to remind listeners, he is the first person ever to win an affirmative order under the Genocide Convention, and he did that during the Bosnian War in the 90s. And Rashed and I watched the hearing at The Hague yesterday, and it was just absolute. I mean, it's hard to find words to fully convey what that encompassed. Rashed,
the first day was the South African side, basically the prosecution, correct?
Right, on Thursday.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And we had previously seen the report. There was like an 80-something page, prelude to this. But this you heard it being basically argued in court.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Rashed, why don't you actually start? If you could take us through the genocidal acts, I guess, which was the first part of the argument that South Africa made.
Yeah, definitely. And just Manny, to some of your questions. So they argued this before, I think 15 ICJ judges, and they represent various countries. The lead judge, they call him the president, is from the United States. And then I think the vice president is from Russia. So there's just a collection of judges from all over the place. And just another reason I think it's important for us to comment on this is because, again, we didn't really see mainstream media covering it, especially live, which I thought was a little, even for them, surprising, given the enormity of this.
And what I was saying, remember in the episode, you were suggesting that most people probably haven't heard of this. There wasn't a lot of mainstream coverage. And I had said, this is the first time I'd heard of it.
Right.
The next day, which would have been like the day before yesterday or something like that, was the second time I heard of it when they finally started covering. So like we covered it before they did. And you're right. I haven't seen, I had the news on earlier. I was doing some things and I hadn't heard it. And I'm talking about like the CNNs, like sort of like the ones you would think, especially with they love to floss their international, coverage. But go ahead. Yeah.
I would argue their international coverage is probably better than their domestic coverage.
I think so. That's
but not to say though, that they do have to get their Gaza coverage confirmed by the Israeli government. So maybe not that. But
it was very much about the Houthis and what they're going through. So I get that. But at the same time, I'm like, you're leaving out this thing. So please go ahead.
Yeah, just the weight of it. Obviously, another nation, especially Israel, is being accused of genocide, and for all the other things that they would televise, like an empty Trump podium for weeks upon weeks, you could show this. And also, I say that only because it's just astonishing. I don't know about CNN, but other mainstream international networks that completely ignored live coverage of South Africa's case on Thursday actually aired Israel's defense today, which is just astonishing. So separately, Chris, the genocidal acts. So what South Africa did is they basically followed the blueprint that they set out in the letter to the ICJ, calling basically for this quote unquote trial. And what they're looking for is an order to basically stop the bloodshed and to save human life effectively. And the first prosecutor for South Africa went through 4 quote unquote genocidal acts, right? And the first genocidal act, they said, committed by Israel was the mass killing of Palestinians. And Chris already gave you some of the numbers, over 20,000 dead. I think, Chris, was it 23,000 at this point? I'm ashamed that I'm starting to lose count. That's how bad it's been. Right. And 70%. And this is continued throughout the war. 70% are believed to be women and children. And there's also an additional 7,000, as Chris mentioned, the injured that are trapped under the rubble. So just for context from what people said during this case, the lead prosecutor said they are killed. Speaking of Palestinians, are killed in homes, in places where they seek shelter, in hospitals and schools, in mosques and churches, and as they try to find food and water for their families. They've been killed trying to evacuate. A direct quote is, Israel has killed an unparalleled, unprecedented number of civilians with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take. I think that's in reference to a report from an Israeli news agency, which they got people on the record and some off the record, Israeli government officials saying, we sort of know like who's in a building, but if we think there's a Hamas fighter in there, and at the same time, if we know there's a child in there, we're still going to attack the building. So regardless of how many people's lives lost, I think that's probably what they're referencing to. This just like breaks your heart. Another quote was, generations of families wiped out with no remaining survivors. This killing is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. It is inflicted deliberately. No one is spared, not even newborn babies. The argument that they made was very precise. I don't think that, as we watched 3 hours of this, I don't think there was like empty words or just fluff. A lot of this was pertaining to the Genocide Convention, which is what they're arguing, right?
These are like conditions that have to be met to,
exactly. The first one I'm talking about was Article 2A, Chris, right?
2A.
Yeah, 2A. So then the second one is the genocidal act that they're alleging is Israel's infliction of serious bodily or mental harm, which they're saying is a violation of Article 2B of the convention, which 60,000 Palestinians wounded and maimed. Again, majority are women and children. And they also mentioned the healthcare system is completely collapsed, right? Then they go to the third genocidal act, and that's under Article 2C, the forced displacement. And this was interesting. I think in context, we talked about in our intro to the recent episode that we did featuring Francis Boyle, that there's a misconception of what genocide is, right? So your first thought of genocide is the Holocaust because of the atrocities, how terrible it was, and just the enormity and the mass deaths that happen.
Right.
Genocide doesn't have to be that. And it could also be a slow burn, or it could be also other decisions that you make that inflict considerable harm on a population. So this is what the prosecutor was arguing. Quote, Israel's first evacuation order on October 13th, that's 6 days after Hamas's attack, required the evacuation of more than 1 million people, including children, elderly, and the infirm. Entire hospitals were required to evacuate, even newborns in intensive care. The order required them to evacuate from the north to the south within 24 hours. And this is where the prosecutor says the order itself was genocidal. So again, I think that stuff is really important because people don't think about these other decisions that they're being made, which Israel's arguing that, we're trying to tell people to move so we could then target Hamas. Right. But then, as we know, they then started attacking the south soon after.
Right.
Go
ahead. I thought it would be just weird. Like then Hamas was like, all right, then we're gonna go south. They're not gonna stick behind and get bombed.
Right. And but again, and that's what they were arguing, and then they continued. So basically, but every part of Gaza was then attacked. Yeah. And then we have the fourth genocidal act, which is under Article 2D, which is the entire military assault on the healthcare system there. We saw the first hospital attack where both sides were debating how this hospital exploded, right? And it was amazing. Like when you think about now, all the coverage dedicated to that, and then just like how things actually got worse, the coverage has sort of declined in a messed up way. They said by December 7th, the UN said that the healthcare infrastructure in Gaza was completely obliterated. And also under Article 2D, they said the UN warned that the reproductive violence inflicted by Israel on Palestinian women and newborn babies, infants, and children could be qualified as acts of genocide. And they're saying including imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group. And that's something that Francis Boyle mentioned, right? And he said he believes that South Africa will get this order. And this is one of the reasons why, because of what's been happening to women, especially pregnant women, seeking to give birth, obviously. And that sort of wrapped up just this first 45 minutes of this extraordinary hearing. Chris, you're about to get into the genocidal acts, the intent of genocidal acts that, as we've documented in that episode, there's been so many Israeli officials just explicitly saying what they're intending to do and then trying to tell us that they're taken out of context. I think I said my first thought when I was watching this was that we knew as we've been watching this war unfold, we know it's unprecedented. Dropping 2,000 bombs on civilian populations is not something that's done, not even the United States. And we have our complaints with how the war on terror was prosecuted. Right. Not even the US would do certain things like that. Forget drone strikes and other horrific things that happen. But this is just on another scale,
to
right?
That scale, right. Mm-hmm.
But then to see it within a few months being articulated in open court under a genocidal allegation was very chilling. And just like watching that moment and just seeing this all unfold, you felt like this was like a moment in history that you're going to remember for years and decades from now. And I don't think I'll ever forget it. So, but yeah, anybody who's able to go back and watch, if you can, all 3 hours, whatever, but just even watch this opening segment. It lays out the entire case that South Africa has brought to the ICJ.
Yeah, honestly, the first 3 or 4 minutes spells it out. I mean, in such a way that you said it's just it's beyond chilling. And I think it's important. So, Rashad, so from the fourth genocidal act, there was a segue into genocidal intent, which was the next, and there was a statement made by the South African side. Genocides are never declared in advance, but this court has the benefit of the past 13 weeks of evidence that shows incontrovertibly a pattern of conduct and related intention that justifies a plausible claim of genocidal acts. Now, I think it's important for listeners to to remember too, in the past 2 episodes, the last one specifically, Francis Boyle talked about how any nation, a party to the Genocide Convention, is obligated to try to prevent, cease, and punish perpetrators of genocide. And that was part of South Africa's main point. I mean, just the fact that this is being broadcast, the fact that they quoted a lot from UN members on the ground there, and the genocidal intent section. I mean, and he pointed it out. I mean, unlike pretty much any other hearing that the court has ever heard, they quoted straight from the mouths of many Israeli officials.
It was incredible.
You know, these were public statements where, you know, the prime minister was invoking, I just want to get the name correct here, but the biblical people of Amalek, you know, and declaring to the country that, you know, it was their duty to get rid of Amalek, you know, that the Palestinians were Amalek. You know, they showed videos of Israeli soldiers. For me, this was one of the most, I mean, disturbing, isn't really, doesn't even do it justice, of just Israeli soldiers singing and dancing a song about Amalek and about how they're wiping the planet from the seed of Amalek, standing in front of burning towns, where you can imagine how many civilians were in that town when it was completely obliterated, just singing and joyously chanting. And, you know, the South African prosecutor brought up how they're simply just repeating what their prime minister said publicly.
Right.
That's what we're doing. So in other cases, you know, to that quote that I read, I mean, you know, it's you know, genocides are never announced, but in this case, you have, you know, and they went down the list, you know, from the military to the legislature to the president, again to the prime minister, all of these officials making these statements. Another statement, you know, you talk about you know, dehumanizing the entire population, 2.2 million people in Gaza, calling them human animals, you know, over and over and over again. You know, and again, that bizarre, you know, horrific biblical reference. Apparently, you know, in some interpretations, Amalek was this entity that could change into different creatures and things like that. So, you know, they're, to his point, I mean, you know, they're, from the videos, from what we're actually seeing, from their own phrasing, they're calling for this level of destruction.
Yeah, Chris, this is like the part of the movie where if this was a movie, you're like, the investigators are looking for a smoking gun and they're about to reveal it to the court, and like you're waiting for it. We knew this smoking gun was there.
Right.
But again, it's just chilling to watch this stuff play out in court using government officials' own words, and then watching how it flowed down to the people who are executing the war.
Wasn't there one official defense, you know, person who basically said, well, they're all Hamas, so if we kill them, you know, I mean, it's not so many words. Basically, he says, if you are in Gaza, you basically support Hamas by
There's no
default.
innocence. Yeah, you're not innocent, not even children.
Right, and which is just, I mean, that's just
because the children voted. They voted for Hamas in 2006.
Right, it's just an absurd statement, and that was an actual. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was basically what the guy said, and that, you know, that just like they're saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, and I want to just quote directly from this part of the hearing. You know, what state will admit to a genocidal intent?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yet the distinctive feature of this case has not been the silence as such, but the reiteration and repetition of genocidal speech throughout every sphere of state of Israel. We remind the court of the identity and authority of the genocidal inciters: the prime minister, the president, the minister of defense, the minister of national security, the minister of energy and infrastructure, members of the Knesset, senior army officials and foot soldiers. These were not happening on the fringes. They were, quote, embodied in state policy. The intent to destroy is plainly understood by the soldiers. The evidence of genocidal intent is not only chilling, it is also overwhelming and incontrovertible. And that was the end of that section.
Well, Chris, and he also says if the statements are not intended, they would have not have been made.
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
incredible.
Like, you know how not to say it. Like, you know how to say, no, we're not trying to kill everybody. And then it's easy to not say it.
And just so to paint the picture, though, like just so to see what the judges heard, I think is important, especially in the order that it was that they laid it out in this sort of attempt at a prosecution, right? They laid out all these statements, right? They said if the statements are not intended, they would not have been made. They're, as Chris said, these are not. And then they said the genocidal intent behind these statements is not ambiguous to the Israeli soldiers on the ground. And then they went ahead and played that video that Chris mentioned, where they're jumping around singing about, what did they say? They're dancing and singing. They're
wiping off the seed of Amalek.
Right.
And then said, what was it? And said something about.
They sang, we know our slogan. There are no uninvolved civilians. These straight from their words from the video recorded in Gaza by Israeli soldiers mentioning Amalek, which Netanyahu mentioned multiple times, and then saying there are no uninvolved civilians, meaning everybody is Hamas and we're going to kill everybody, which plays to that the notion of obviously genocidal intent. It's just horrific. Yeah. It's just like just watching the dancing and singing as people are being mutilated on the ground, people are being buried in rubble, children are having their skulls bashed in and dying. Families are generations of families. There was a quote in here about just generations of families just being completely annihilated. It's horrific.
Yeah. I mean,
I was going to say, well, no, go ahead, Chris, please.
I just kept coming back to this one thing, right? Now this is going to decide whether these atrocities, and I don't think anyone would say these are not atrocities, that we're basically just watching every single day. And this is just what we're watching, right? This is just what these outlets are playing for us. That there are atrocities taking place. Look, October 7th was an atrocity.
Absolutely.
What's going on now, there's no other description. These are atrocities. Right. And here's the thing I kept coming back to. Whether or not the court rules that Israel's actions are, quote, genocide, right? You still have, let's just take one incident, a dead toddler under a pile of rubble that used to be a home, whether in a refugee camp or some other town, it's still a dead toddler buried beneath rubble of their home. And somebody needs to be held accountable for that. Somebody needs to be held accountable. And so that's how I was also sort of perceiving and viewing these hearings, and we've learned a lot in the past week, Rashad and I, about this stuff. And basically every single nation has an obligation, right? Because it's something known as international customary law, where sort of just these like fundamental rights, human rights, are just sort of a given, that need to be defended. And just a nation like South Africa raising their hand, showing these things, saying, oh my God, look at this. Yeah. This accounts to genocide. Is the blood is on everybody's hands.
From what I understand, and you obviously too have been following it way more than me, but from what I think I got from the episode is that Israel could have not appeared, right? They chose to kind of answer to this, and I think you were saying earlier before we started that you did hear some of their response. What is some ideas of their justification, their response, their defense, as it were?
From what I viewed and from what I've read so far, I remember. So this happened this morning our time, so like 4 o'clock, right? Just because it's happening in The Hague. It's sort of what a lot of people expected. Unfortunately, where I previously said the South Africa case is, you could tell because it's also very compelling, but it's grounded in the clauses laid out in the Genocide Convention, which both Israel Israel and South Africa are party to. That's why it's these two states going at it, right? Countries going at it. South Africa has made it clear that they're going by they're using legal reasoning, right? Israel, on the other hand, not that they didn't do that, but they mentioned October 7th, right?
Right.
As the justification, for those horrific abuses, required a response.
Sure.
And this is the response, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they take it another step further, which I think just makes it sound so unreasonable. And I don't know if it's because they're trying to use a legal argument. Like, I'm really struggling with this, or if it's public relations. They're effectively calling South Africa Hamas. I know it's a running joke, especially if you're on Twitter and other social media outlets where everything is Hamas, right? So just to play up on that joke, one of the Israel lawyers, he lost a piece of paper, like one of his sheets, so he had to stop talking, and then it was just gone. And so the joke across social media was Hamas took it, right? Just because it's unfortunately that's what it's come down to, and then it just waters down everything that's happened before. 3 months ago, Israel had like a ton of support after the atrocities committed by Hamas.
Sure.
In 3 months, we've gone from just like global support,
right,
to being accused of genocide. Right. So the arguments were, South Africa is doing the bidding of Hamas, basically, that they're aligned with them, that the atrocities on October 7th justified this. And in terms of the genocidal intent question that we just discussed, of course, they said those words were taken out of context. They didn't really have that meaning. They went ahead and recited quotes, obviously, from elected officials talking about humanitarian assistance. I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but like it's humanitarian assistance, which South Africa argued is not enough, right? Because it's just, it plainly isn't. And you're not allowing it in. You control Gaza. Right. Meanwhile, you're dropping 2,000 pound bombs on people and killing women, majority women and children, right? Yeah. So that was sort of like the crux of the defense without getting into every part of their legal argument.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I was gonna say, so then Chris, you alluded a little bit earlier, and when the episode with Professor Boyle went into it as well, what this means if they are found by this panel of judges to have indeed committed genocide. What happens? Like, are we supposed to all like arrest Israel?
It's a great question too, and I posed, and at the end of our interview, I don't think we used that snippet in what we aired, but I asked them again, just because Rashad and I have gone back about this, and again, the whole genesis, or a lot of the big part of one of the reasons why when we heard about the International Court of Justice, we wanted to do something about it, was because we've been planning to do something on the International Criminal Court, and it's sort of many defects, and it's sort of toothlessness, right?
Right.
To some degree, and I asked him, I said, so who enforces this?
Right.
Let's just say now in his prior case, he had the world behind him. Right. the U.S. right. He paints the portrait of walking out of the courtroom literally to the world media, explaining to them that he just got this order of genocide currently taking place, and within, I think he said 48 hours or something like that, there was a no-fly zone imposed by the U.S. and allies. I told Rashad when I first started learning about, I thought a lot of it was just maybe just public shaming that also would push some of these countries, but the mechanics behind it, my understanding of it, according to what my recollection of what Boyle told us, is this could go before the Security Council. Now, the U.S. obviously has veto power, so you have to imagine that a country that, we're sending, I think, billions, right, in arms. You have
bypassing Congress,
sending all this, even more weaponry to this conflict that's killing all these civilians, which is another whole thing. But you would imagine that they would want this, and now the State Department, the U.S. State Department has already called it meritless. South Africa's claim.
This case, this
Yeah.
claim, yeah.
So if it is vetoed,
divisive or something,
because they have
Right.
to sort of
Right.
defend themselves before they actually have to defend themselves.
Let me
Right.
play a
Well,
little bit
just
of.
one
hold
last.
on. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, listen. So if it does get vetoed by the Security Council, my understanding is then it could go before the General Assembly for a vote.
Mhm.
It would keep escalating. But also, just before you step back in, Manny,
Yeah.
just quickly, what they're looking for is a provisional order, which would basically means like you have to now take immediate action to prevent harm being committed against the group that is
Right.
you know,
Who would
subjugated
have
to
to?
quote unquote genocide.
The other members
All 153 parties to the Genocide Convention, which, just for a topic we're going to discuss briefly, I'm pretty sure includes Yemen.
Interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. There would be pressure, but there would also be possibly action by all these other members of the, as it happened in Bosnia way back when. I guess I was going to say it's interesting to play it out that it goes to the United Nations, and you mentioned the United States veto power and the fact that the United States has supported almost across the board Israel's onslaught. But just to play, white devil's advocate, we have you have the administration, you have the Biden administration, you have news from them saying that they have leaned on, and I'm just saying what I hear, they have leaned on Netanyahu and Israel to fall back a little bit, over the course of this thing. Like once they realized, I think that that you said that support was turning and they were doing the most, as we would say. That Biden was like, hey, there was like one call of a phone call that they were like barking at each other, and Biden was like, this conversation's over, and like slammed down the phone or whatever. That's what I was purported to. So I'm wondering to what degree it's that like catch-22 of, of course we're supporting, of course we're selling. It's very important to support Israel against this, but the fact that they're doing too much and going too far is now working against them politically. Do they know this? Do they care? Do they not realize that that people are protesting in a church? You know what I mean? Biden for this? What's going on here?
I have come to we've argued about this, privately. I've come to the conclusion that this is not an accusation. This is just what I think.
Sure.
So
we know
that this is Joe Biden is fine with this. To me, there's no other logical explanation for watching children being mowed down and watching all these atrocities. He's repeated lies that the Israeli government has stated, the beheaded babies, which still has not been founded to be a real thing. It came out of one news segment and went across the globe like fire. He's repeated that even after it was said that it was false, right? They've repeated the fact that there was an operational center under the hospital in Gaza, which again, there's no evidence. Washington Post also refuted that. And then it just so happened 2 weeks later, the New York Times wrote a story based on completely just like terrible sourcing. No one named. But it really was a underground hub for Hamas, right? Secretary Blinken, I believe, when asked about the atrocities committed by Israel in this case, talked about a story of a family and people losing limbs. Like, I'm not going to get too explicit. That turned out to be a lie also. They're just repeating lies, unfortunately. And I just don't see how anybody with good conscience, morally or ethically, has any moral or ethics would actually not stop this. Joe Biden could stop this at any point. There was an article in the Huffington Post recently about how people are increasingly concerned. It's one of those articles that you would sort of see during the Trump administration that, again, I really believe this. If this was written and Trump was president, it would have its own news cycle. That people are within the White House and other agencies are just increasingly concerned about Biden because he's the one effectively making the decisions, they're saying. So they don't trust his Middle East decision making. So that's my takeaway, is he's okay with this.
Okay. We hear a lot of disagreement with his administration, and I think that, I guess, We'll have to see how this plays out. Maybe he's just supremely overconfident in his reelection, goals. But there's a lot of pushback on this because of this. And if he can change it or do something to affect it or sway it, I don't know that that's true. I'm not an expert in this, so I couldn't tell you. I feel like it's kind of difficult to tell the country that's bent on genocide to just, can you stop it, or else what?
The U.S. has tremendous. I know people always say this, but the U.S. has tremendous pressure over Israel. I believe the number is
isn't it vice versa though?
We subsidize 20% of their defense budget.
Okay.
The bombs that are being sent,
I get it,
are U.S. bombs.
Yeah.
And they could, and it's been said from Israeli officials that if the U.S. stopped support, they would exceedingly have to drive down what they're doing. Like it would not even be on this scale. Maybe we can argue that they wouldn't stop, but the scale of it would slow down.
Yeah.
A few things I did want to mention, if we can, just back to the genocidal hearing.
Like I said,
because I get your point, because I think that's where a lot of people go to. Like, okay, so what's the point of all this, right? And I just keep coming back to the fact that I'm amazed that this even happened. B, I think it's incredible. Like, I actually think it's astonishing, brave, really, considering the landscape that South Africa brought this case.
Yeah.
I mean, no country was going to do this, but South Africa stepped up. To hear these arguments live, to see it laid out in front of a court, and all the gruesome details that, again, that we're aware of, but to just see it play out in this way in a legal setting was bone chilling. So I think that's sort of like, I don't want to say a victory, given that we're talking about horrific genocide here.
Right.
Like, I can't believe we're doing this.
That this is even a discussion.
Like, this is insane to me.
Right.
Yeah, I just think that in itself, like, if you just want to think about that in a vacuum, is probably a victory that we got to this point, and we'll see what happens. Again, I said it's 15 judges, all from various countries. I'm not an expert on courts. I can say, and we can all agree, that even with our Supreme Court, there's a level of political, dealings here. Yeah. So will the Russia president want to vote a Russian judge vote a certain way because of their what's going on in their politics? Maybe. So again, this is not just like morally, these are not like, bleeding heart liberal judges out there.
Right.
I just want to state too that so the president of the International Court of Justice is from the U.S., former U.S. State Department, longtime personnel, and wait for it. I mean, look, does this mean something? Does it not? I mean, you would hope that anybody sitting on a bench would take each case impartially and look at the facts and base it. But so the president has voting power over tie breaking, right? So that's significant, obviously. This is the same person, Joan Donahue, who it turns out represented the United States before this very court. She was part of the United States team of attorneys before this very court when Nicaragua filed an order condemning the United States for massive violations of international law regarding military infractions into the country, mining their harbor, trying to basically depose their government, the whole Iran-Contra scandal was involved in all this. Now, she was on that team, right? And what happened?
The United States.
What's that?
Defending the United States.
Defending the United States, and what they did was, they just my understanding of it, at the beginning of it, they just said, you know what, this court doesn't have jurisdiction over this. We're refusing to participate. So she was part of that team. The case went on. The case continued, right? And the United States was found guilty of multiple violations of all these different things. Violations of sovereignty, violations of military, interventions in internal affairs, blah, 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 like just tons of stuff. And an order of compensation was issued, which to this day, from what I understand, we just ignore. But when I first heard that, I was like,
Right.
shouldn't this person, I don't know, recuse themselves? Or, I mean, you want to talk about a conflict of interest, right? I mean, you hold some sway even without that tie-breaking vote power.
Not to mention if it goes to the UN and the US could just veto it, it's like I am the Supreme Court. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And think about that case.
They're able to knock it down. So
anyway,
no wonder certain presidential candidates just feel that they can do anything and pardon themselves, and you know what I mean? Like we kind of have that
lawlessness.
That's like, it's amazing.
Just to the point like Chris is talking about, the U.S. is very, it's sort of separate but related.
Mhm.
The U.S. is very hostile to The Hague. So much so, this is not the ICC, the International Criminal Court. This is the ICJ, International Court of Justice. So hostile, in fact, that during the War on Terror, the Congress passed a law called the Hague Invasion Act, where the U.S. president can send military personnel to The Hague to basically do a prison break of Americans accused or charged under international law for these crimes. And they could do that in support of other countries.
And thus ties to what we were saying about an episode about the ICC. Right.
So there you go.
The world court.
This whole world court is out of order.
The body that's supposed to hold nations accountable.
Right.
Where the United States refuses to sign the Rome
but
Statute.
Don't we agree to be part of that, and so in other words, if somebody else found somebody else that we didn't like to be guilty of something, we'd be like, yeah, let's go get them. Let's go put in that no-fly zone. Let's go bomb them on the. So we're like part of it to say we'll do the things, but also just not if it's against us.
Exactly.
And it's like being part of the United Nations and then just saying, well, not us. Rules for me, not for thee, right? It sounds like that's what we're saying we're doing on the international stage.
I think that's effectively it, but also, the U.S. obviously hegemony controls everything. So
there's a song, Hegemony Rules Everything Around Me.
That's it.
Cream.
I
don't know if you heard that.
Cream. And just so people know, like if this does go to the UN and the US vetoes it, people need to remember. Yeah. I don't know if we mentioned this in the intro of the last episode, but there's a reason why they're calling it meritless, because the United States can be seen complicit. So they really can't comment.
Right.
And I don't think they can actually, at this point, not veto it, because again, they can't see, they can't be seen that they agree with the court, because then they are co-conspirators.
Well, they would be. So in a way to get out of it, I listen, this is such a armchair quarterbacking kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the order passes, and then we have to stop doing what supporting as much as we've been doing, because now it's on the record, and then we can be like, well, we thought it was meritless, but okay, if you say genocide, I guess it's genocide, and we'll now Israel, you stop it, you bad folks.
Yeah.
That's the only way that we could, as a nation, get out of it. To your point, to that jeopardy, that situation. But we'll see what happens. I guess. Do we know when this is going to be decided?
So again, it's just for. I think people get confused. It's just for a provisional order. I think the case itself, genocide continues. I think it could happen rather quickly. I think that's what the American judge said. I don't know how quick. The
provisional order is sort of like a stay, right? In other words,
basically.
We're not, while we figure this out.
Exactly.
You need to stop doing the things.
To stop slaughtering.
And then it'll be like sometime after that when it's determined whether it was actually a genocide or not.
Exactly. And a quick note, just back to the hearing again, based on something Israel said today, they said that they've this has come out of media reports that they're intending to now slow down like the pace of the bombings or the scale or which again, you need to try to believe them, because weeks and months ago they've said they've been doing precision targeting, which they aren't. So yeah, if you take it on its face that it's accurate,
they were very precise. They bombed Gaza.
Yeah.
They didn't get outside of Gaza. They kept it right.
Yeah, it's not a huge place, so
they colored within the lines. It's
pretty accurate. South Africa's argument is it doesn't matter. Like, you could slow down, do whatever you want.
What's done?
You still committed genocide, but also continue genocide by famine, starving people, humanitarian crisis, just so people understand. And also just the most horrific of all the numbers, like that shocked me. And like, I think the killing numbers just terrible and awful. And just like it, like literally I go to bed every night thinking about these poor children. Like I really do. Like I'm not trying to act like I'm sort of like
and thousands of
morally
children. That's
superior
ridiculous,
person.
yeah.
Like it's really brutal. 4 out of 5 people in the entire world who are now suffering from catastrophic hunger. 4 out of 5, 80% live in Gaza. And that's a number that takes into account the entire world. That's how bad the starvation and humanitarian crisis, not to mention just like the diseases that are spreading,
right,
and all that. That just think about that for a second when you think about just the extent of the horrors. Even when you're not being bombed,
right,
you're still being a victim of this war.
yeah.
I know we're sort of running late, but I think we probably should, Chris, unless you have anything else to say about the hearing, get into Yemen a bit.
No, go for it.
So, Chris or Manny, I forget who mentioned it, but on Thursday night, the U.S. Began attacks on Yemen. I think U.S. and the U.K. as a joint mission, right? Obviously, we've been seeing for some time Yemenis, or the Houthis specifically, taking action, like a blockade that they've created in response to Israel's bombing of Gaza. What I wanted to talk about this briefly because you just don't hear this in U.S. media and corporate media, unfortunately. The reason for the Yemeni blockade, and this is not to justify anything, but what they're saying is the reason for their blockade is because they're trying to stop a genocide. Other people have argued this. This is what South Africa is attempting to do.
Right.
If they get an order to stop a genocide, this is essentially what Yemen is effectively doing, which puts the U.S. in a weird position, but that's their stated goal.
Right.
And within that goal, they said, within those parameters, they have said that if there was an end to the hostilities, if there was a ceasefire, they would also stop the blockade. It's important to remember the blockade that they've created was to prevent ships from going, I guess, to and from Israel, right? They're not, in theory, targeting every ship that's going through the Red Sea. The U.S. justification, the Biden justification for what is, in theory, an illegal bombing of a sovereign country because they did not declare war or even pass like some AUMF or anything for this.
Stopped us
on
before.
Thursday. Yeah, it hasn't stopped us. Was because of slowdown of global shipping, right? Because of like delays to shipping, I think is how they framed it. They literally are admitting to bombing a sovereign country because of delays to global shipping.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
You're not, I mean, this is like, you could file this under like, I'm sorry to curse, but like shit that you can't believe.
Right.
Literally on the same day that they bombed Yemen for quote unquote delays to shipping, the White House itself came out and said the U.S. economy has seen very little impact from Houthi attempts to disrupt commercial shipping in the Red Sea.
Right.
This is the White House, the same White House that hours later bombed Yemen for this.
I did hear one of the officials, and again, I'm sorry that I'm not quoting who it was or where I saw it, and so forgive me for that lack of journalistic integrity. But the phrasing caught me where it was, "This is a self-defense." They said, "We're attacking to prevent an attack, so it's self-defense." And I'm like, "What? No, that means." It's an offense. Like that's the definition of offense is you attack to prevent an attack is like you're attacking first, right?
It's just 4D chess. We can't keep up.
I can't keep up.
I mean,
they're
too good for us. They're too smart for us.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring this up before. Like, I don't know if people realize how consequential this is. Like Yemen has said they're going to continue. Like you could bomb us.
Right,
The Houthis have said you could bomb us. You could do whatever you want. We're going to continue. I shared a video with Chris just earlier today. Thousands upon thousands of people in Yemen taken to the streets. Like they're like they don't care if you want to bring war to them. Everybody has different reasonings, but one of them is to bring an end to what's happening in Palestine. So I just I have so much more to say about this. We've been going on for a while, but I just wanted to get this out because I know a lot of people in the media don't report it like this.
Yeah.
And also just be mindful that every time you see a story about the Houthis, you're going to see Iranian-backed Houthi rebels.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to hear about the U.S. supported Saudi campaign that for 7-8 years, I forget how many, decimated Yemen, led to one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. U.S. was funding that with their bombs, and they supported it. That doesn't even include the drone strikes that were used during the Obama administration in Yemen to destabilize it.
Right.
And just my last point on this, just to note how strange these times have become. Saudi Arabia, which was the one prosecuting that war against Yemen, has come out against the U.S. strikes in Yemen. We're just living in an insane place now.
All right. Well, I appreciate us as a regular person that doesn't always know all of the things, us taking the time to break some of this down. We'll monitor this Yemen situation. I think if it escalates, as it looks like there might be some degree of escalation, I would think that, like you said, you'd have to go digging for some real information. So maybe we'll come back and, break that down a little bit further, give a little more context and let people know what they need to know that they might not be hearing through the corporate controlled news media that's usually in front of us that we get the most access to. So I appreciate us for doing this. I appreciate y'all passion and diligence in keeping abreast of these stories. And I guess that's it. Unless you guys have any closing thoughts or anything else to share.
One last, two last quick things is, another thing to Rashed's point, what you also won't hear is that, these very people who are being slaughtered have been under a 17-year blockade by Israel.
Yeah.
Right. You also won't hear a lot of times Israel referred to as an occupying force, which they are. Or I believe I read a stat that said something that there's the number of UN resolutions against the occupation outnumber, I think, I might get this wrong, but it's like the total volume of resolutions passed within like 5 years or something like that from the whole body. So you won't hear that stuff. And I just want to end on that, I think it's very easy, to get desensitized to all of this stuff. When you hear numbers, approaching 30,000 innocent civilians dead, 60,000 injured, to Rashed's point, 7,000 still missing, probably under the rubble. These are mothers, these are fathers, these are sons, these are daughters, aunties, uncles, grandparents, children, toddlers, newborns. These are not armed militants.
Yeah. Facts. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll keep on it. Thanks for, again, both of y'all work, and thanks to anyone who's listening, watching. Follow us to make sure that you stay abreast, and we'll give you, a little bit of an angle you might not hear somewhere else, or it might give you, some information that you can then go and seek out other places that are like us, that do kind of get into it a little bit, but they're not, they're hard to find. So we do what we can. Once again, we are on Substack. Newsbeat.substack.com. It's a free newsletter service. You'll see all of our episodes, our main episodes, and bonus content like this. You can find us on YouTube as well. And we are at usnewsbeat.com. From there, you can find links to all of the things and follow us, get more information about us, contact us if you have any thoughts. And I guess that's it. We have a couple other episodes, fuller episodes, main episodes we're working on. Nothing to tease right now, but we'll be back soon with that. Again, social justice issues, often mixed with music. And when we do full episodes with artists that will create original rap lyrical content to emphasize, punctuate, and illustrate the points being made by the activists and experts and folks who are facing injustice, who will also appear on our episodes. It's an award-winning podcast, and if you're just finding us now randomly and you listen to this whole thing, you might want to check it out. So check us out, usnewsbeat.com, on Instagram at usnewsbeat, on Twitter at usnewsbeat, and on Twex at US Newsbeat, and of course, newsbeat.substack.com. It's a really wealth of information that you guys put out in conjunction with the incredible sounding and well produced podcast episodes that we make. Just so much information about these issues that, again, as you said, Chris, you don't hear about nearly enough out there in the world. So that's it. I'm Manny Faces. That's Chris. That's Rashed. We're the News Beat, and we'll be back to see you, hear you, smell you, taste you very soon. Peace and love.